frequently with her, and consider checking out the book called Dorothy and Jack. Listen in. Well, thank you for being with us this morning. I have Gina Dalfanzo on the air with us. She's the author of a new book called Dorothy and Jack, The Transforming Friendship of Dorothy L. Sayers and C.S. Lewis. And thank you for being here with us, Gina.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, would you go ahead and explain a little bit about yourself and how you came to write this book?
Sure. Well, I am a great reader as well as a writer, and Dorothy L. Sayers and C.S. Lewis happen to be two of my favorite writers. I first discovered Lewis in high school, reading Mere Christianity and the Screwtape Letters, a couple of his most famous books. I discovered Dorothy L. Sayers in college. I was actually taking a class called Theology in Oxford Christian Writers. So we studied Lewis and Tolkien, Chesterton, some other famous Christian writers, and Dorothy L. Sayers was one of them. She is best known for her mystery novels, the Lord Peter Wimsey series, which is still very popular now. But she also happened to be a Christian apologist, a playwright, a translator of Dante's Divine Comedy, and a lot of other things. So anyway, in this class, I discovered that not only did I realize that these two were going to be two of my favorite writers, but I also discovered that they were friends with each other. They had a really interesting friendship that lasted about 15 years, from 1942 until her death in 1957. And when I started reading their collected letters, I found out that they had written a number of letters to each other, which made for great reading. They were funny and interesting and affectionate and sometimes argumentative, but just made for great reading. So recently, a couple years ago, I was looking for a subject for a new book, and it occurred to me that this would be a really fun research project, something I would really enjoy learning more about and writing about and sharing with other people. So that's how the book came to be.
It's really a unique angle, because we have books on the life of C.S. Lewis and there's various biographies, but to have a whole book just focused on a friendship and to really get into the letters, I've never quite come across a book exactly like it. Was there any other examples that you were drawing from as you prepared this kind of work?
Well, we know a lot about Lewis's friendship with the Inklings, who included Tolkien and a lot of his other male friends who lived in or near Oxford. There have been some books about that group. There have been one or two books about Lewis and Tolkien's friendship. Colin Duryea has a really good one. And those all made for great reading, but there was nothing out there, or nothing much out there, aside from a few articles that I could find about Lewis and Sayers' friendship. And because they happened to be, both of them, such great favorites of mine, that was the friendship I was interested in exploring more.
And then it's also very helpful, just broadly, to have a work explaining a Christian friendship between a guy and a woman, a man and a female. And you bring up a number of points throughout the book, how we really need more healthy examples of that kind of relationship in the Christian church.
Yes, I think those kinds of examples are enormously helpful, because too often we tend to concentrate on the temptations and the dangers, and they do exist. I'm not saying they don't, but I think there are many examples out there of great friendships between male and female Christians, where they help each other grow closer to God. They both have a lot to teach each other and ways to help each other. And so I thought that was worth exploring and holding up as a good and healthy example of how to do it right, basically.
So what would you say to someone like me who has read Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, enjoyed the Chronicles of Narnia, but has not gotten to enjoy Dorothy Sayers? Why, or what unique offering does she give to the Christian reader?
So much. One of the first works I read of hers in that college class was called The Man Born to Be King. It's actually a cycle of radio plays. They ran on BBC radio. about the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And they are just wonderful reading. They've been published in book form, so you can read them as plays, along with the introduction that she wrote, the prefaces that she wrote to each play. And they have taught me so much about Christ, about who he is, about how utterly unique he is, for lack of a better word, of his goodness and the way he just remade the world, came into history and changed it forever. So that, I mean, just those in themselves are so wonderful and so helpful. And they meant a great deal to Lewis, too. He read them every Holy Week and was always very moved by them. So there's that. And then she wrote a number of essays. Creed or Chaos is a famous one. The Dogma is the Drama. There are a number of others. They are less well known now than her novels, but they're still out there, still in print, and very good and very helpful. Her great emphasis when she wrote about Christianity was on the importance of everybody knowing the basics, of understanding how important the theology was. She was not a writer who ever cared to explore the emotional or sentimental side of Christianity. She was a very intellectual writer in all things. And when she came to write about Christianity, it was the dogma, the theology, the doctrine that she was very concerned to make sure that people understood. Because even back then in the 40s and 30s, 40s, and 50s, she found around her a culture that was sort of vaguely Christian, culturally Christian, but where a lot of people just didn't really get what Christianity was. And she basically was asking, how can you believe it if you don't know what it is?
And yet she uses the medium of story and to tell those great truths. It's very easy for us to think, if I want to have an emotional roller coaster, I'll read a story, and then if I want to have an intellectual learning experience, I'll read a textbook. And she kind of breaks down that divide.
That's right.
Well, tell us a little bit more about Lewis and Sayre's background when it comes to being raised religious, and what kind of resentment they may have had, and their experience maturing into adulthood with their religious background.
The story of Lewis's faith journey is fairly well known. He was raised in a Christian household, at least nominally. He got away from the faith in his teenage years, considered himself an atheist for quite some time. And then eventually, when he was working at Oxford, had begun his academic career, he gradually came back to the faith, helped in large part by Tolkien and one or two other inklings. He, in a lot of ways, the intellectual side of faith was very important to him too, but it was a commitment of his whole life. I mean, the logic of it drew him back, the logic of faith, the rational side of faith, but also the imaginative side. He was a man who for a long time had tried to reconcile rationality and romanticism, both of which were very strong in his nature, and he found both those sides of his nature drawing him to Christianity. And I think one reason he's still so loved today is that both of those are so strong in his work, in his thinking, and in his faith. Now, Sayre's was the daughter of an Anglican clergyman, so she was brought up in the faith by religiously committed parents. It would be too strong to say she ever broke with the faith. She never really did. She, as I said, she was very intellectual. As a young girl and a young woman, she was actively exploring what all the reasons were for belief and why she believed what she believed and so forth. She became a great fan of G.K. Chesterton, so did Lewis for that matter, and Chesterton's writings on faith really helped her see all the reasons to believe Christianity, and so that was a great help to her. But there was a time in her late 20s, I believe, when she got, I guess you could say, a little reckless in her personal life, and did not always live out her faith in her relationships. She ended up having an illegitimate son who ended up being raised by her cousin for her. Her cousin took in foster children. And I think that was one of the experiences that sort of brought her up short, helped her sort of say, okay, what am I doing with my life? What's going on here? And sort of guided her back to faith. But she never really made an intellectual break with it. It was just that for a while she wasn't really reconciling what she believed lived her life, which happens to quite a few people.
Yeah, I've experienced just recently being raised in a Christian home, but then when you move out, you go to college, you become an adult, you have to kind of take that faith and make it your own. And
right.
Oftentimes there's a shift. There's many people at a young age that swing all the way away from the faith or just grow into a very different kind of faith.
Right.
Something that really draws friends together is having a common passion for something. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just a circumstantial, they're seeing each other a lot, but they have a shared love of something. What was that for Sayers and Lewis?
Lewis would say, he did say in many of his works that having those passions in common was the absolute most important thing in friendship. He was a great believer in you have to have these things in common, and they're what matter. And so their faith drew them together, their interest in theology, also their interest in literature. They started, Sayers was quite a famous writer by the time that they came in contact. Lewis was just starting his career as a writer, but she wrote him a fan letter about something he'd written, and of course that was a great encouragement to him, and he wrote back. And they, for a long time, it was what you might call a very professional friendship. They started to become friends, but they were always talking about work, about reading, about theology, about all these things they had in common that brought them together. And it was fully 5 years before they started to talk about more personal aspects of their lives. So that was the kind of friendship that really worked for both of them. They liked it that way. But I think if a friendship goes on long enough, it can't help but start to incorporate some of the personal, and that's how it worked for them.
And that was Gina Dalfanzo talking about her recent book, Dorothy and Jack, about the friendship between C.S. Lewis and Dorothy Sayers that I encourage you to check out. The Bible's full of stories of friendship, deep, powerful friendships. I think of David and Jonathan. I think of Jesus's relationship with his own 12 disciples, and even those that were perhaps even closer to him, John and Peter and others. And yet friendship takes work. It takes effort. You have to put in the investment of time to really reach out and talk and meet. And it can be even more difficult in this season of isolation that we're all in. So I encourage you to reach out and to take that time to think of that friend that you maybe haven't spoken with or seen. And 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, "Therefore encourage one another and build each other up." And that's such a good reminder for us to have, not to become slothful or lazy or frivolous in how we spend our time, but to really be devoted to the relationships that matter. And that's good friendships that are worth investing in. They're a gift from God. They truly are. And so I encourage you to spend some time investing in friendships as you can. So I want to play this song by Lovekin called Darkness and Delight. It's a favorite of mine, and we'll be back in just a few minutes for the rest of our interview.